Welcome back. It's time for us to actually deploy our app that we've been working so hard on. Now, up to this point, our entire project, our entire beautiful app has just lived on our laptop. If we wanted to show it to somebody, well, we needed to have it set up on our laptop. But that's not really realistic, right? If we ever want to get users and spread the word out about our project, we need to have it online, accessible to everybody. And we're going to do that in this section. If you remember, we have the front end, all done with React. We have our backend server that has a beautiful API created by Node and Express. And we also have our Postgres database set up. And we're going to be setting up each one of these rectangles that you remember should be separate computers. We're going to deploy them separately so that as long as they can communicate and they know where each other lives, it doesn't matter where each one of them is as long as they have this connection. And we're going to be deploying to a place called Heroku. And Heroku is just a company that has a ton of computers and they're willing to host the files that we give them for us. And I'm going to be walking you through this. And you might be asking yourself, why aren't we using something like a HostGator, something that I've heard of before? Well, HostGator or Bluehost or most hosting platforms that you've heard of are these simple platforms that we've talked about before, right? They have usually an Apache server that is just hosting files. So they're really, really good at hosting and serving really simple HTML-based projects. If you just have an info page or an about website, well, they're really useful. Maybe you have a WordPress website. That's good if you're not worried about the servers and everything is taken care of them. But that's not how we deploy apps anymore. If you're actually building applications which are more complex, we need something that gives us more control. And there's many options. And these are some of the more famous ones, such as Amazon, Heroku, which we'll be using, EngineYard, DigitalOcean. There's also Google and Microsoft that offers web services. And they offer a ton of different things that we don't really need to get into. There's a special industry called DevOps that really focuses on this domain. But we want to know how it works so that when we encounter it, we can explore it more and understand it. At the end of the day, these are just computers managed by these companies. They allow you to run your files on their computer, and in return, well, we pay them, but they also make sure that the computers are going to be running really, really fast. And if we're running something like Postgres or a database, they're going to try and do their best to make sure that it doesn't go down or that there's backups. And you're going to be hearing a lot about these sort of companies a lot when you get into the web development field. We're using Heroku here because it's really developer friendly and they also offer a free tier, which is great for projects like this, just for demo purposes. If you go to their website, they have really, really good documentation and it's so simple to set up. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you to sign up for this. It's completely free. As soon as you log in, you will be directed to something like this, your personal dashboard. And you can see you can use different languages to deploy. In our case, we're using Node. And we can just click on Node and it will take us to documentation that takes us from zero to getting our app deployed. But you don't need to go through all of this because it's so simple. Let me show you. I'm going to link to all this documentation after this video so you can take a look for yourself, but it's really, really easy. If you go to documentation and deploying with Git, it's as simple as few commands. It tells you that we essentially need two things. One, we need Git, which we already have, and Heroku. So let's talk about our game plan. We're going to be putting our server on Heroku and also our Postgres database on Heroku. And the front end, the React app, we can put it anywhere really, but we can use GitHub Pages that we've used before for background generator project because it's free. Let's look at the API first, because that's the most important one, I think. It's the connector of the two. We already have Git installed, so let's get Heroku CLI, which is the command line interface. That is, we can use it in the terminal to install it. Now, before we get into this, I went ahead and put our API on GitHub to make sure that we can actually run these commands, so make sure that this is a Git project. I went ahead and did that without recording it because we've gone through it before. I didn't want to bore you with that. You should know how to do that by now. So looking at the Heroku CLI, we have both Mac, Windows, and Ubuntu operating systems that we can run it on. So again, I'll link to these and you can decide which way you want to install it yourself. For me, it's a Mac, so I'm going to use brew install and install this command line. And as you can see over here, I already have this installed, but for you, it might take a little bit longer. And once it's done, I'll say it's installed. Go and have some fun. All right, so we have Heroku installed. If we go back to the documentation, it tells you how to add your app to Git, which we already know, so we can skip over it. And it says that we need to just run Heroku create to create an app. We go into our directory and simply run Heroku create. And look at that. It created our app. It even gave us a URL that we can reach our app. All right, awesome. But in order for us to use this, well, let's go to this URL and see if it works. We can use Heroku open to actually take us to this link. Now let's see what happens. It says couldn't find that app. Well, because we actually have a few more steps. We have to actually deploy the app. And the way we deploy it, we have to first check something called Git remote. And it's something we haven't really talked about, but let me show you what it is. If we run git remote -v, we get, let me open this, make this a little bit bigger. There you go. We see that we have Heroku and Origin. Up until this point, when you work with Git, the default is Origin. So you may do commands like git push origin master. That meant we're pushing to origin, which is GitHub, and we're pushing onto the master branch. And origin is just the default name that GitHub has. We might have done the command just git push because the default is always origin and master. So that was just the shorthand way of doing it. But now, because we've run these Heroku commands, we also have Heroku now. So instead of pushing to GitHub, we can push to Heroku. So in our case, if we go to deploy code, we see that we simply run git push Heroku master. Let's do that. I'm going to run git push Heroku master. Let's see what happens. You see here that I got an error, and this is an error that you might not get, but because I've used Heroku before, it has a different name. You can see over here, shielded anchorage, versus the name that I actually want, which is Radiant Ocean. And we see that in our remote as well, that we don't have the Radiant Ocean app. We have something else that I've created before. And the way you get around this is for an existing Heroku app, you can simply run this command to rename it. So we do git Heroku git remote -a and the name of the new app that you want to add. In our case, it's this. And now if I do git remote -v, all right, I have Radiant Ocean as my app. And don't worry, if this is confusing, it's just a matter of reading documentation. It's very specific to Heroku and something that you'll get used to, but now our app is pointing in the right direction. So let's try that again. We're going to try running git push Heroku master once again. All right, looks like it's running, and you can see over here, we're creating an environment, we're installing a bunch of things, it's installing node modules. So it's running npm install for us and getting everything set up. And it's saying verify and deploy, done. Awesome. Let's do Heroku open and see if this actually works. And it's just hanging there. And don't worry, I did this on purpose. The reason it's not working is, instead of me telling you, let's figure out what's actually going on. There's another command that we can use, which is Heroku logs -- tail. And this gives us a log into what's happening in this computer where the server is running. All right, so it looks like everything is running. Node server is listening to port 3000. Oh, we see that we get an error now. So it looks like we're getting a boot timeout. And it's saying web process failed to bind to port. And this is something that you'll read in the README or the documentation of Heroku. What's happening here is that Heroku has its own port that it assigns. And as we've talked about environmental variables before, because we're setting our port to listen to 3000 here, Heroku wants its own port. Doesn't necessarily care about 3000, has its own thing. So the way we get around this is we can use process.env.port. So that if we receive a port from the environment that we're running in this case Heroku, run that. Otherwise, run port 3000. And we can change app is running on port 3000 to something more dynamic, like process.env.port. All right, let's go back and run git push Heroku master. But here's the thing. Because we're going it through Git, we actually have to add these changes to our repo so we're pushing anything. If we run this command just by itself, it'll say everything is up to date because we haven't done the git add, git commit commands. So let's do that. Git add, git commit, adding port, and then we'll do git push Heroku master. I'll run through the commands again. It's redeploying the entire server. And if we go to Heroku open, looks like we're hanging again and we get internal server error. Let's look at the logs. We go again to Heroku logs tail. And this is a little bit tricky. If you scroll up here, we want to go to app. Okay, so Nomon's running. App is running on port 9098. But if you keep going down, after npm start, we get a reference error. Database is not defined. And this is something that I left here on purpose, just to show you how debugging works, where you have to look through the logs. If you remember, we're no longer using the database that we created, the first variable. And because our app, when it first loads, goes through the root route, it's going to run this command and it's going to say, well, database doesn't exist. I don't know what you're talking about. So to fix that, let's just change this to it is working. If we save, and yes, unfortunately, we have to go through our git commands again. We're going to git add, git commit, changing response, and then git push Heroku master. All right, it's running through some magic. And let's do Heroku open. It's working. our app is now at this location and we can reach it using this. Let's test that theory. Let's add this instead of our localhost to our front-end app. And by the way, if you go to the Heroku dashboard, which I can just use over here, and we see that my app is running. It has all the logs that I need. I can look at metrics. I can look at activity. You can look at the deployment process and add different things. There's just so much stuff you can do. It's really, really cool. But let's just test our assumption to make sure that our app actually works. I have the SmartBrain application running here. Let's open up app.js. And I make this a little bit smaller so we can see. And where we do our fetches, we're going to change localhost, which is our computer, to the actual endpoint. Let's copy the endpoint that Heroku gave us. And change it for all the localhost locations. So we have this, and if you remember, we also have the register and sign in as well. Just to confirm with you what we just did, we've essentially just told the front end where these arrows should point, and it should point to the location of the server, which was provided to us by Heroku. All right, so let's give it a try. I'm going to run npm start, and hopefully everything is working as we want it to. If we sign in or just click on sign in, nothing happens, so we need to register somebody. We'll go with Todd at gmail.com. 1, 2, 3. Register. Oh, we get an error. Let's see what we get. If we go to console, server responded with status of 400 bad request. Let's look at the network and see what happens. I click register. And we get unable to register, which is actually a really, really good sign, because that is what we've written. Remember, in our server, we said that when we try to register, if it fails, we want to return unable to register. So it's actually connecting to our front end. That's amazing. But you may notice a problem. That is now the fact that we don't have a database anymore. Because our database in the backend is referencing, if you remember, our localhost. But since this computer now lives somewhere on Heroku, it has no idea. Well, it might know what localhost is, but they definitely don't have a database called SmartBrain, do they? So now let's create a Postgres database on Heroku. But this video is getting already a little bit too long. So that's for the next video. I'll see you in that one. Bye-bye.